back to science class. Today, we are going to continue the discussion of ocean currents, but we're going to look at the specific relationship between the surface currents and the deep ocean currents. When you combine those two currents together, you get the thermohaline circulation. And this is the massive conveyor belt that transports heat, salt, and water all across the world's oceans. In order to understand how this thermohaline circulation works, we are going to go ahead and take a look at the poles. So, at the poles, it is quite cold. So cold that the water that is up here will freeze and turn to ice. When this water freezes, it actually only freezes as fresh water. It doesn't freeze as salty water. So it leaves behind a lot of salt. This means that the water that's underneath the ice is really salty, really cold water. Now, salty and cold water is heavier than warm and salty water, so it's going to sink down to the bottom of the ocean. As it sinks down, it's pulling in the warmer, less salty water towards the poles. This is what causes these movements between the currents of the surface layer and the deep ocean. It's right at the poles. This is where it kind of starts to propel itself there. Now, if we look at water around the equator, this is water that gets a lot of direct sunlight all year round, so it warms up really well. This warm water gets transported up to the poles or down south to the different pole there, and it brings with it warm air. The thermohaline circulation brings water, heat, and salt all around the oceans, and it actually helps regulate the planet's temperature. Like I said, when we warm the water here, not only does it bring the water, but it also brings the warm air. That's why if you look at Ireland or the UK, or heck, even Europe, and compare them to where we are, we're about the same level in terms of latitude, but Europe is a lot warmer. It's a lot milder. They don't get as much snow as we do. They don't get freezing temperatures, and that is because there is a current that comes from the south and brings warm air up to this region here. It's called the Gulf Stream. Now, there are other currents like that will transport cold air and hot air as well. Some currents bring cold air down from the poles to the equator, and so on and so on. The thermohaline does help regulate the Earth's temperature, but the oceans also do a lot of that too. You see, if you were to look at anywhere along the coast, the weather there is going to be relatively mild compared to in the continent further inland. This is because the water absorbs a lot of the heat from the sun, so it doesn't get too hot along the coast. There's also a lot of breeze that kind of passes over by the coast, caused by these currents, and those breezes help to maintain the humidity at a lower level. Unlike, here where we have super humid summers that increase the heat that we feel in the summertime. Now, what happens if the ocean warms up too much? We are seeing climate change happening, and we are seeing that the overall temperature of the Earth is increasing. Well, if the overall temperature of the Earth is increasing, that means that the waters are also warming up. So let's look at the poles again. If the water is too warm, then you won't have ice freezing, or not as much ice to freeze. So then the whole process where the ice freezes, it leaves behind the salt, and then that salty cold water sinks to the bottom and starts off that cycle with the surface and deep water currents. It won't happen, at least not as effectively. So the warmer the oceans get, the less effective these currents will become, because there's less of a differential in temperature. And temperature is a driving force for these currents. Not only is it going to mess up the currents, but if we look at tropical storms that happen along the equator, if the water is warming up, that's going to fuel more severe tropical storms. I mean, we've seen a lot of large storms like Katrina that happened. So we are going to see more and more severe tropical storms. The warm ocean actually helps to propel it. That's why it often happens in late summer, because that's when the oceans have warmed up enough to be able to make these tropical storms. So we need to be very careful about how warm our oceans become. Thank you for listening, and I will see you all next time. Bye!